friends. Thank you for joining me for the second solo episode. I wanted to take some time and talk about something that's something I spent a lot of time doing, something I've invested a lot of time and just trying to acquire skill and gain knowledge, designing like marching band shows. As with the last one, there's a lot of ways that the things I want to talk about kind of overlap to other activities, but I'm pretty much just going to try and relate everything to marching band, just since, again, that's kind of my main MO. But again, I would love to hear from other people who, write marching band shows, teach them, perform in them, or maybe, I've become a little bit more aware of like show choir, but I know also things like cheer and dance competitions are kind of similar in the way that we put things together. So definitely, I'd love to hear your thoughts and start a conversation about any sort of pageantry arts design in whatever that means to you. I also kind of wanted to start off by saying some of the things that I'm going to talk about as well are sort of specific to my setup. And so I'm actually going to start off by kind of describing what I use, what my setup is. And so you can kind of see where I'm coming from and then how maybe that relates to your stuff. Or, if you're looking for new gear or new software, maybe some of my suggestions will be helpful for you. But when someone asks me, it's like, hey, do you want to write this marching band show, or do you want to, do my guard music, or do you want to such and such? Even in the world of classical composition, a lot of these things apply. But I use a lot of different resources to kind of get me the best result and the best time along the way with those results. So, what I usually start with, or what I try to start with as often as I can, is good old pencil and paper. It's such a good practice to, have that sort of tactile response of physically writing something and, erasing it. It's one of those things like, I'll get into a little bit later, but, I also use an iPad sometimes to handwrite stuff, and sometimes I'll erase something on there and be like, what was that thing I erased 10 minutes ago? I actually think I might be able to use that. And, on a piece of paper, it's still kind of faintly there. But that's something that's one of the things that's kind of lost on an iPad. But I try to take notes. And so I'll have a piece of like regular notebook paper, and then I'll have a piece of staff paper, and then I'll sketch out, okay, they're going to have 6 trumpets, and they're going to have 13 trombones, or 1 flute. I try to keep those things in mind, and then I'll write out short little segments, maybe, things that become a motive or a melody or something. Or maybe, while I'm sitting down at a piano or a keyboard writing, I'll write out a short chord progression, maybe 5 or 6 chords in a row, and be like, okay, cool, here's how I could expand these. And a lot of times, with marching band, that kind of stuff gets simplified. But having it written in a physical form means you could use it for something else. Even if what you write changes or goes away completely, you still have it. And I think that's really cool. And that's one of the reasons why I try to start writing things by hand. Once I do get to a certain point, if I'm on my 3rd or 4th piece of paper, or I need to actually start orchestrating some small ideas, I'll move to my iPad. So I'm currently using a 3rd generation iPad Pro with the 2nd generation Apple Pencil. So it's kind of the newest and latest and the biggest screen. I have the larger screen. And what that helps me to do is, usually it's a little faster to help sketch those things out. I'll even sometimes I'll like import a piece of staff paper as a photo or a PDF directly into my iPad and actually mark directly on there. Or, sometimes I even start writing on my iPad. Just kind of depends on the project and what else is going on. But on my iPad, I have an app called GoodNotes. GoodNotes is actually a super versatile app for pretty much anything you need to handwrite. I got it a couple of years ago for playing shows. So I would get a PDF, for example, of like a musical theater score or something, and I would be playing for at one point I was playing for a show that had 6 different casts, and I think there was 3 or 4 different sets of cuts. And so instead of trying to like scribble in really tiny font, I would import the whole thing into GoodNotes. I would have a highlighter or a marker tool or whatever. Or even like the highlighter was best because it was like transparent, and I would be like, okay, here is cut for the first cast, and then on the next one, or I'd be like, skip to measure such and such for cast 3. And it really helped navigate some of those things that would have been otherwise really complicated. Because a lot of times, if you're reading music, you have to do page turns and try to play 3 or 4 instruments with one hand if you're playing drums or percussion. So it really helped to be able to quickly navigate those scores. I don't use like a page turn pedal. It's never seemed worth the investment to me, but I do know that it's super convenient to have that. I just haven't made the investment yet, but I know a lot of people that use other apps, like specifically music apps, will have a really good time with that Bluetooth pedal. GoodNotes is not by any stretch of the imagination strictly a music app. I also use it to take notes in class. In any class, it's good to have that. You can kind of make templates and have a regular piece of notebook lined paper, and then insert a piece of manuscript paper next to it, and then on the next page you have graph paper. You can import PDFs and stuff. So I'm a huge fan of that. I think the pro version or whatever is $8, and to me that was just a no-brainer. I know there's other apps for just general note-taking stuff. A lot of people I know use Notability with the same iPad setup, or really even any iPad with a powered stylus is going to be really nice to help you kind of get going with all of this stuff. All of the iPads on the market now pretty much use some version of the Apple Pencil, which again is a little bit on the expensive side, but it's definitely worth the investment because of the precision and the convenience that it allows. So I use GoodNotes. There's Notability. There's also an app called Fourscore, which is super popular with performing musicians, because you can import scores and it knows that you're reading a score. So for example, it has like annotations, and you can mark cuts and take out pages, but in a non-destructive way, so it won't actually change your file. Or with that Bluetooth pedal, you can actually program like regular page turns or like half page turns. Outside of the sort of marching band design world, if you're looking for something to perform with, definitely check out Fourscore. But because I write and design as much as I perform, I use GoodNotes, and you can also use, like I said, Notability is another really good one. I know a lot of people, when they see an app and it costs $5 or $6, they're a little hesitant. It's worth it for the convenience that you get out of it. It really is. At any given time, you may be able to see probably at least GoodNotes and Fourscore like on demo at an Apple store. I used to work for Apple, so I kind of got used to what they were doing there. And the iPads I don't think are going to change anytime soon, so you can definitely go pop in there, check out, see what that pencil feels like. And it's a really nice setup. I also use that, and one of the cool things about having a tablet idea is that you can have it also has speakers, so you can kind of have something on a loop using a couple of different apps like the Great Slow Downer, or there's other apps that are on a mobile platform where you can kind of loop 20 seconds or whatever of a song and sort of transcribe things by hand if you need to, or jot down ideas while you're hearing the music, the source music, if you're doing an arrangement. That's super convenient too. Those first two steps, that's just kind of what I do, and I find a lot of success with that, and I think that it works for what I do. I suppose they're not necessary. I know plenty of arrangers that just kind of go straight to the computer with it. But it is kind of what it is there. I like handwriting because there's stuff that you might need to write down and kind of be thinking through that don't involve like sheet music. For example, if I'm getting, I want this drum break to be 64 counts, I can write a little 64 above my manuscript, or I want the choreography to be such and such, and so the music needs to reflect that. Well, that may not always be super handy inside of a score, but just to have as a notebook paper page next to it. You can go through titles, you can go through numbers of instrumentation that would clutter up a piece of manuscript paper, but would be perfect for a piece of notebook paper, or even a blank piece of paper sometimes if you need to draw. So that's why I like to kind of start with those things, kind of in that order. And honestly, I've probably started on my iPad for the last couple of projects, the last couple of big ones, just because they were complicated. I had enough information to work with right away, where I was like, okay, I'm not going to spend time trying to figure out like a 3-note motive. I'm going to actually get into this thing and start arranging. But while I'm doing that process, another thing I mentioned in my the last episode. Communication is super, super important, particularly in the marching arts. The last couple of groups that I've worked with, we were talking just preliminary stuff, and once you get to sort of the iPad stage, or even on just a handwritten piece of paper, I would send notes. So sometimes it would be those, okay, here's my show flow idea, here's what I'm thinking, or here's some of the musical material that I'm thinking to portray this idea, and I would take a photo of that or export it to PDF and send that to the people I'm working with. And that way it's not just, okay, here's what I want to do, and then 3 months later, here's your show, no discussion, no collaboration. Because there's a lot of things that may change. Ideas can't develop as readily that way. But that's one of the things that I like about having that set up, is being able to communicate and collaborate at a much higher level and a much more meaningful level, in my opinion. Once we get to, okay, we're going to write a show, maybe we want to talk about, themes and concepts and stuff. That's great. I'll start taking notes on that. And then before I actually start writing notes, another thing that I think a lot of composers and arrangers leave out is knowing the instrumentation. And that actually has a couple of different levels to it. So, not only do you need to know, okay, I'm going to have 4 trumpets versus 3 French horns versus 6 trombones. That's the numbers of themselves will yield a certain level of, heartache, or maybe their ideal instrumentation, but you need to know that stuff, because if you're going to write meaningfully for the group that's asked you to write for them, you need to be able to voice it in such a way where it's going to sound like it was written for them. One of the hugest reasons I advocate for custom written shows is, every band is different, and within a program year to year, what if you have 3 killer solo trumpet players and they're all seniors and graduate? Well, you wrote a really high trumpet part and really good, good trumpet book last year, but if you try to do that again, resting on the laurels of, I did it last year, you may be working with 6 sophomore trumpet players who have trouble hitting an F in the staff. So every year it's extremely important, and those numbers to me are so vital to the success of the whole show, not just the arrangement, but of the entire show. We had a note this year was, okay, we've got a super, super strong low brass section. Right on. that's great. You know, I can work with that. Maybe there's a low brass feature, and you know, it being me, there were several low brass features. But I've written for groups before that was like, okay, I have one baritone sax and I have one tuba. No trombones, no tenor saxes, 3 altos, but one of them doesn't have an instrument. That was a legitimate, I wrote a show for that instrumentation before, but that was really great to know. And also that show, I may post that show a little later. It was a lot of fun to work on. The director, the tuba player, the one tuba player was like an all-state tuba player, and the bari sax also, the director called for a bari sax solo, which is awesome. And then there was like in the ballad of that show, there was actually a bari sax and tuba duet, which was great, except for there was no bass clef on the field other than those instruments. So that challenge was a lot of fun. But you know, I looked through some of these sort of shows in a box or prearranged shows, and so many of them have this sort of like ideal instrumentation where, you know, you're going to have a really strong, you know, upper woodwind or trumpet section, and you're going to have like 6 or 7 tubas, and you're going to have completely evenly dispersed middle voices. I've never written a custom show for that instrumentation. It's never occurred ever. Even in your 200 to 300 piece member groups, those aren't, even though there's a lot of people, those aren't always ideally staffed as far as numbers and voices go. So I'm a huge advocate for that reason for custom written shows. It's not necessarily that it's going to be any more difficult, and a lot of times it's actually easier because it's for the kids. It's not for reselling to be universal. To me, there's no such thing as a universal band. But let's say, so moving on in the process, then, so you've got your, okay, I'm going to write a show. We're going to talk design and concept. We're going to take a whole bunch of notes. We're going to get the numbers as close as possible, as soon as possible, so I know what kind of strengths and weaknesses the band is going to have. Another thing, another reason to know the instrumentation, kind of not knowing what not to write is really important as well. For example, if you have a really cool like upper woodwind feature, and the upper woodwind section consists of 1 flute and 1 clarinet, that's not going to speak, and that would be better served in another section. So you've got your numbers, you've got your voices. You can actually kind of start putting pencil to paper. Now, there's kind of 2 different routes to go. It just kind of depends on the show you're working on. One of the shows I did this year was a good portion arrangements. So pop tunes and interspersed with some original music, and then kind of put together in a what I think to be a meaningful way. And then the other show was completely original music, which I'm really glad I got to do both of those in the same year. A lot of times I'll do 3 or 4 shows in a year, and they're all arrangements. Or if I'm just writing the drum books, it'll be almost exclusively arrangements. And there's nothing wrong with either one of those things. I like doing both equally. But it was they present a different set of challenges. So what I try to do with arrangements, I'll kind of start there because I think more people are probably more familiar with that as far as creating shows around goes. So if you're going to do arrangements, hopefully you've taken some notes. You know which songs or pieces that you're going to use, and then what I do is if I can find a chord sheet or something on the internet, I'll kind of take a look at that, see if it'll help. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But if it's something that's only got like 4 chords, it's not so much help. But it helps the transcription process if you can kind of get a baseline of where you're going to go with some of this stuff. And also, if it's a song and it has words, the songs that I was arranging this time around, I wasn't very familiar with. And so, having those sheets kind of knowing what the music does and being able to read the text, the lyrics, even when I'm not sitting down at a keyboard or when I can't necessarily be listening to the song that I'm arranging. It really, really helps to be able to familiarize yourself with that thing. So that's something I pretty much do right off the bat. I'm like, okay, I'm doing this song. I'm gonna, maybe learn it on my piano or learn it on guitar and learn how to sing it and get really familiar with it. So that way you can kind of arrange it in a more meaningful way. It's also really, really important to discuss what parts of the song you're going to use and also why. For example, if there's a really sad song but there's a really inspiring part, you can kind of use that, and it's really good to know how and why you're going to do those things. So, if you think, oh, okay, we're going to arrange this song, this must be a really sad part of the show. It may not necessarily be, or it may start off sad, and that nice inspiring part comes in, and that's something you can kind of give yourself a little bit of a guideline to work with. And it can come down to the phrase, or it can come down to like, okay, we're going to do a verse and a chorus, and we're going to use it because this is how that contributes to the theme of the show. For everything to be cohesive and for your intent to be very clear, that stuff needs to be thought out before you get bogged down in, oh man, that B flat on that instrument is going to be very sharp in this chord, or stuff like that. So kind of getting used to that idea helps a lot. Then, what I do is I decided a couple of years ago, when I started grad school, I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this whole professional musician thing, I'm going to go all in. And if there's ever a reason to pay for like a premium music streaming service, I think that's going to be one of them, because it might be like, hey, you want to play drums at a country gig in a day and a half, and you have work the next day, and then on the way there you have to be able to learn the song. I don't want to have to be like fishing on YouTube or take the risk of it not being somewhere. So I went ahead, I subscribed to Apple Music and Spotify. I know that there's a couple other really good services. I think even there's a YouTube Music. If you're familiar with the UI of something, I've been using the Apple Music version of things for a while, so it made sense to just get the premium version of that. It's like $5 a month or something, or maybe even 10. I'm not sure. I don't remember. It's gone up and down. And Spotify, I think, is 5 or 10 as well. That $10 or $20 a month, even if you're just using it to casually listen to music, it's definitely worth the investment. And I encourage everybody to do that, whether or not you're an arranger or a show designer. So I use those things, really, really effective tools to giving me access and cutting down the time it takes for me to find something. If I this year when I was arranging the pop tunes for the band, it was a band in Oklahoma. Me and the band director made a shared playlist. So as we were going through the design process and talking through the first couple steps, it was really, really cool. It's like, hey, I just thought of a new song I might want to add. I'm going to throw it on the playlist. Sweet. That's about as easy as it can possibly get, as far as being able to collaborate with someone who lives 1,000 miles away from you. It's really important to be able to do that, and so I highly recommend those services because they're tools I use most of every day, for sure. So then let's say you've got which cuts you're going to use, you're going to know which parts of the song. You're also listening to the same version of the song on those streaming services. That's a good thing. And so now you're ready to kind of start, transcribing or working from either a chord sheet or a tab sheet or whatever you're familiar with. Then to kind of start putting things in order. Inside, on my manuscript paper or on my iPad, I will write down how many instruments are in which group. So I'll put like, okay, this is the flute 1 part. I'm going to have 3 of those. This is the flute 2 part. I'm going to have 1 or 2 of those. So I know that right off the bat. I know exactly what I'm looking for. And a lot of times I'll either start with the melody or the tuba part. Um, and I mean, there's kind of different schools of thought. Almost always, your tuba is going to be playing the bass line. Even I a lot of times will score my tuba below the bari sax, because even though they double sometimes, I don't always think of the bari sax as the bass instrument. So sometimes I'll write that as like a real baritone line, or maybe as like a bass guitar line that kind of travels up the neck. So I'll usually start with tuba and either flute or trumpet, depending on the range of the melody. And even if neither one of those instruments take those functions, it's nice to kind of see it spread out that way. And a lot of times if it's a song where there's a pretty solid structure, I'll actually take the time, I'll write that structure out. If it's going to be verse chorus and the chord changes every 2 measures, I will start from that place. Even if I end up going against that or cutting off a measure or a beat somewhere, I'll start there, because that's, being somewhat true to the original material, I think, is important. And it also kind of takes some of the sweat off of it being, I've just got to transcribe this absolutely note for note from the very beginning. That can be daunting, and a lot of times, if you're not a full-time marching band arranger, you may not have 7 hours to transcribe every single note of every guitar solo or every, drum fill. So just kind of starting with the skeleton that's more than likely already there. I am a huge fan of services that you find online. I think Ultimate Guitar is where I go for most of my stuff. I gave them $2 to get rid of the ads for a lifetime subscription. Super worth it. And that's typically where I start with those. If there's something that I find is not particularly tabulated well, I have transcribed things by ear. It's a great skill to have, and even if I do start out with a chord sheet, while I'm listening, I'll try to get in a little bit more detail, just and identify a melody. I was like, this is a really cool counter line, or there's this nice little voice thing that wasn't in the first section. So I'm not completely without ear transcription, but I typically won't start there, just for ease of moving along the process. So if it's an arrangement, once you kind of get the skeleton of what you're working with, that's at that point when I would really start putting things into my computer and really think about it from a larger scale, and seeing what actual instruments sound like. And again, I know there's a million different ways to do this. The next part, sort of the bulk of the work, but for what I do, I use Sibelius Ultimate. I got their subscription plan. I'm not a huge fan of the way they do that, but it's what I started with, and it works really well for what I want to do. When I was writing predominantly for percussion instruments, I found that VDL, Virtual Drumline, paired up a lot easier, and the notation system and shortcuts were a lot more friendly to the way I do things. So I use Sibelius Ultimate. I think I'm updated, and they kind of do it in the background now, so I don't always see when they do it. But Sibelius Ultimate, and then I use Virtual Drumline for my drumline sounds. Sometimes I'll use VDL. I think a couple of years ago, or maybe even Sibelius Ultimate, came with the rumble and fanfare sounds. I typically won't use the rumble sounds, which is like the drums and percussion sort of built in. I think it's by the System Blue folks. I find those voices a lot more useful for film scoring or video game stuff, where it doesn't need to sound necessarily like a real drum. It just needs to evoke some sort of reaction. So I'll use the VDL sounds. Every once in a while, I'll use the marching tuba or the marching euphonium ensemble from the fanfare pack. But honestly, I most of the time stick with the Sibelius 7 sounds. They're a little bit easier on my CPU, and also to me they sound a little bit better. Some of those voices have this really weird, like, affected darkness. I mean, that, the Blue Devils are known for and very successful with. I don't prefer it. I know that some people, people using Finale, are able to get better wind sounds. But to me, the stock Sibelius stuff works. It's worked. I've used Sibelius 5, 6, 7, and whatever the version is now. And I've always liked the Sibelius sounds. They're a little heavy on the storage, but I think they boot well. And I am running everything through a MacBook Pro. It's a 2018 model, but I went ahead and got the i9, so it's got a bunch of extra, standalone video RAM, and I think it's got 32 gigs of RAM, just like regular RAM on board, and then a 1 terabyte hard drive. So I've pretty much worked it out to where I can keep everything on my hard drive and never have to worry about it like overclocking or overheating or anything. Just because I knew I'm going to be working with some pretty heavy files, and so I went ahead and got a really good machine. You can definitely work with machines with a lot less horsepower. I personally like Mac just because the operating system at large is a little bit more stable, in my opinion. I know some people kind of swear by Windows, or they don't want to spend the money to invest in an Apple because there's really no getting around the fact that they're a little bit more expensive for the same performance even. But to me, the operating system is worth it. The support system is worth it. If there's ever anything wrong, you can pretty much go and get it at least looked at, if not completely taken care of. But like I said, this is just kind of what I use. I think there's a MacBook Air out for $1,000 that, from people that have talked to me, will totally run Sibelius just fine. And you can even like edit some marching band scores. So to me, if you're gonna use a piece of like sort of professional notation software, and you're going to be writing large scale works like a marching band, it's worth the investment. Just go ahead and do it. That way you won't be frustrated when, okay, now I've got all 35 voices that I'm going to use, and oh crap, my computer can't handle it, and just shut off. That's not very good. Or what's even worse is that when it tries to work and it won't shut off, it just kind of crawls along. So consider making that investment in a nice machine. I know that there's good Windows machines out there, but I can't speak to any specifics. I definitely wholeheartedly prefer and advocate for the use of Mac for pretty much anything creative, but definitely for this particular thing. Now, one of the reasons that I use Sibelius is, let's say, as I'm transcribing some of these things, I can put chord symbols, and if I want to change a key or if I want to move it over, it's really easy to kind of move and change things around as I'm doing it. And I like the way that the formatting works, so I can kind of copy paste big chunks of music, and it doesn't throw the rest of everything off. And that sounds pretty simple, but some of my experience in some other notation apps or programs, it wasn't as easy to move stuff around as I'd like it to be. But if you're working with an arrangement, let's say that you've got 3 different tunes that you're working on. And I know that there's a lot of different schools of thought on this next topic as well, but for me, if a marching band show is going to feel contiguous and it's going to have some flow to it, I will probably transcribe different pop tunes in separate files, but then when it gets time to actually put it in line in order that the show is going in, most of the time, unless I'm specifically requested to do otherwise, I will put that into one file. And so, measure numbers, rehearsal numbers, those are all contiguous. So, the top of the show might have letter A, B, C, D. The ballad might be EFG closer HIJKL, something like that, or replace the letters with rehearsal numbers. Same idea, but to me it makes a little bit more sense, and it's definitely easier to go back and pull things from other movements like a melody or a rhythm or something, and place that into what you're working on if it's in one file. Some places I have had requests. It's like, hey, well, we're going to learn a movement at a time, so you can go ahead and put it and just export different movements. And so, especially with longer files, I like the Sibelius formatting ideas that they've got there. So once the stuff is sort of all put together in one file, I'll actually start kind of hammering it out, and that looks different, I think, for everyone. Some people can just kind of look at scores and just kind of make it happen. They don't have to have any sort of oral example. I think most people probably, though, what I do, they'll have a keyboard or a MIDI controller or a piano, and they'll kind of at least play through some things as they're writing. Another thing I really like about Sibelius that really helps is, let's say I've got a really cool percussion lick that is 8 bars long, and I want to be able to write some winds on top of it, or even vice versa. Let's say that I have a cool wind thing that's maybe kind of longer note values, and I want to be able to split it up meaningfully. Sibelius now has a loop feature, so I can highlight 8 measures, hit the loop button, and it'll just play back, and I can have my piano or keyboard next to me and just play through it on and on, just like you would if you're recording in the studio, or if you're writing a pop song or something. That being a feature now in Sibelius has been super, super helpful with being able to come up with cohesive ideas in a lot less time. So while I'm actually in the trenches of putting notes on paper or notes on the machine, I'll also have my iPad out, or even sometimes my phone. GoodNotes goes to the phone. I'll have my GoodNotes app out, and I'll be taking more notes, referring back to things. I think, okay, here's my theme sheet. Am I doing everything to sell this theme? Is what I'm doing right now contributing to the theme? And having 2 different screens helps a lot with that. And if there's some things sometimes if you're at a Starbucks or something that's got a small table, you can't have 2 screens out. I also will take I'll take little notes inside the Sibelius score and then hide them, so that they still kind of show up, but in a faint gray. But when I go to extract parts or print stuff, they're not going to show up. It's only going to be something that I can see. That's just kind of little different tips and tricks that that I've kind of picked up over the years about what helps keep things in line. And another thing that I think is worthwhile to talk about, as far as pieces of gear, just as someone who's taken some time and played in studio settings, or when I was working at Apple, I got to test all sorts of different headphones, and so I think that if you're gonna be a composer / arranger, even if it's not the highest end, top of the line thing, or even if you don't use headphones all the time, there's gonna be some times where hopefully you want to hear, specifically how do these voicings sound? How does this, what are these samples that I paid $300 actually sound like? So I use a couple of different pairs of headphones when I'm just kind of out and about, and I know I need to do some kind of large scale stuff, or if I'm just doing block chords to rearrange later. I have a pair of AirPods. Again, when I was working at Apple, I got to try these on a lot. I was like, that makes sense. They're really small, they're easy to carry with you, and the battery life is really good. There's other kinds of Bluetooth earbuds as well. Jaybird's got some, Bose has some. Even there's, if you can look at Wish or Amazon or eBay, they've got little dinky $20, $30 ones. They're good to have. They're definitely good to have. I went ahead and went with the AirPods because, again, I know they have a warranty. I know that they can be repaired or replaced if something is defective. Or, if I step on one or wash them, I won't be out my headphones too much. And the price was actually pretty good for what they were, for the quality that you get. But check out all different kinds of brands. There's once the AirPods came out, of course, a bunch of people kind of jumped on that bandwagon. I also use a pair of actual studio headphones. They are the Bang & Olufsen. I think they're the Beoplay H3. There's now an H4, H5 model out. Now I think I paid $300 for mine. Then the price of those has gone up. So those are a little bit cost restrictive. I don't know that I would invest that much again. I would probably for a brand new pair maybe $300, but I think the new ones are $4 or $5. And to me, that's for what I was going to use them for, it wasn't really worth it. But places or companies like Bose and Audio-Technica have a huge range of headphones you can get. And even Beats are not my personal favorite, but I was around them a lot. I got to kind of learn about them. If you're writing something with a lot of low end, or if you like to listen to music with a lot of low end, like hip hop or any sort of EDM that's got a good set of low sounds, Beats are probably something that you would consider because their prices are okay. I think they're between $250 and $350. A lot of good low end sound. Definitely something to consider, but something a little bit more well-rounded, like the Bang & Olufsen or the Bose or Audio-Technica. I've at one point had a pair of headphones from all of those companies, and I've been super pleased. So definitely, it's worth the investment. It's so much easier to hear stuff when you have it in a nice pair of headphones. It's something as simple as, oh, my flutes are playing a G and my clarinets are playing an F sharp, and it's supposed to be, an E minor chord or something. It's something that simple that can easily be kind of lost in a normal set of computer speakers or even in a pair of earbuds, regardless of the quality. So I would say it's definitely a good investment. For me, I wanted something I could carry around. They have really nice folding studio headphones, but I would get, if you're looking for those, I would get some that have Bluetooth connectivity and a wire, just in case. You never know. It's always good to have that second option of the wired connection, as most high-end headphones are Bluetooth at least. So going on to, that's the gear I use for listening to things. That helps for listening to source material and material as you write it. And so going back to sort of the communication and collaboration piece that I always kind of come back to. Another reason I fell back on Sibelius is because a couple of years ago they acquired the licensing for MP3. So if let's say that I finish a chunk of the show, or I have a first draft and I want to send it, I can easily text that MP3. That it's a compressed file type. It may not be. It may be a little bit more lossy. As you transfer it, it may lose a little bit. But if you're only transferring it once or twice, you probably won't ever notice that. So basically, what you're going to be able to do is send a pretty high quality still, but compressed and therefore a smaller file size over a lot more mediums than you were able to in the past. So I used to have to send .aiffs or WAV files, and those are just huge files. So I like Sibelius being able to compress things. I got in the habit of typically sending 3 files. So I would go in and I would send an audio file of the current version that I'm working on. I would send a PDF of the full score, and also Sibelius allows for video export, which is really cool. Because a lot of times, let's say that you've got 4 minutes and you're driving, or you're not going to have access to something, or you're riding in a car. You can't write where you're at, but you can listen to something or watch something. You pull up the video, you can see who's playing what, and it kind of just scrolls through in real time, and it's really cool to have that. Then the audio file, if they just want to have that, and the score to make make marks, send notes. So I typically will send all three, and this is one of the places where I try to be just profusely organized. So I usually won't bother sending more than one file in a day. So when I export a file, if it's a score or if it's an audio file of the movie, I'll put such and such school or such and such group, such and such year, and then the actual date. That way I know, okay, this is what changed going from July 15th to July 26th. And so I can kind of refer back to things. And also, at any point in time, the director or whoever I'm working with will know which is the newest file. And it helps kind of keep me accountable, because if they ask me for something and I don't do it, I can't just say, oh, well, you must have an old file. It's like, no, this has the date on it. This should be done. I've actually found that that's helped a lot. I've thought about it, I was like, oh, I could put that off until next time, but I was like, oh, I looked back, it's like, oh, that was wrong 3 versions ago. Let's go ahead and fix that now. So it's one of those things that makes it super easy to keep organized. Within, as far as like actually sharing files, I think that's something that a lot of people kind of overlook too. There's a million different ways to do it, and I've done several ways that I like a lot. But my main preferred way now is actually Dropbox. So I've used a bunch of different kind of cloud services in the past too. Dropbox, Google Drive. There's one just called Box. There's iCloud Drive. For folks on Windows, I know there's OneDrive. A couple others. There's some that kind of go in and out, and sometimes even like your phone company will have a cloud service. But to me, what was important is the ease of sharing and collaborating on files. So a lot of people find Google Drive to be the easiest way to do it, and I don't know if I'm just using it wrong. It just with the permissions stuff specifically. So like I had shared a Google Drive folder with one of the schools that I was working with, and it wouldn't let anybody look at the files. Even though I made it public and I shared the link, it said they still had to request access, and every individual person, so every student or parent that wanted to go on and print their parts, would have to send me an email to ask for permission. And I was like, I don't want to do that. They don't want to have that extra step or two. So what I actually did is ended up switching to Dropbox. And again, it could be user error. I don't think so. I pretty much followed all the directions. Dropbox was much easier to share and didn't require requesting permission to access. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll put something on my Dropbox storage, which again, if you're going to do the collaboration thing, is worth the investment. I think I pay $10-15 a month for 2 terabytes. Some absurd amount of storage space. But you don't ever want to have to worry about, oh, I can't share these files because I'm out of storage. If it's something as simple as 4 or 5 drinks from Starbucks a month, it's like, oh, I'll just drink water and pay for my cloud storage. It's worth it, no matter what service you use. I know Google has 2 terabytes for $10 or $12. iCloud Drive is also really nice, even though the sharing stuff is not going to be great until probably the next fall. Again, I prefer Dropbox. It's worth the investment because I wanted to be able to have sort of two-way communication with that sort of thing. So I could drop a file and be like, hey, here are 3 files that I created for you already. They're in a folder with the date on it, and then they show what, of course, the type that they are. And within the Dropbox app, you can easily click on them and experience them and annotate them and return them. Or create a new file, put it in the Dropbox, and all they have to do is reply, hey, I put a file of notes in there. Or if I'm on my computer, I actually get a pop-up, such and such, change such and such file in this folder. So that to me is just absolutely paramount to success there, being able to communicate and collaborate in that way. And so I will kick back a version. To me, it's just like a good volley in tennis. having everything, getting everything in its place is going to take a couple of people a couple of weeks, at least. Even if you're really spending a lot of time on it, things should have time to sort of sit and settle, and then you kind of reinvestigate them and reimagine them, and then sit and settle again, and then it should have some time. And then, because while you're working out the music, the sort of logistics of it kind of need to be worked out as well. And I think even if your only job in the process is the music, you should know what the guard's going to be wearing. You should know what the drill's going to be. You should know who's riding the drill, what their experience is. It's important to be part of the entire process instead of just, okay, here's your book and never talk to me again. Thanks for the paycheck. Bye. That's sort of getting into the whole attitude behind it. I'll expand on that a little bit in a couple minutes, but to me, that's where you get the fun part. It's like, oh man, I've spent 3 hours, and I'm going to send this to the other person and see what they think. And they'll a lot of times they'll come back and say, hey, I loved every second of it except for the last 4 seconds. Here's what I didn't like about it. And I'm like, oh, okay. And there's a couple of ways, as a composer, anybody who's collaborating, like, oh, I liked those, but yeah, I'll change it. No big deal. If you're writing the music, your taste and your palette shouldn't be the end all be all of what actually ends up being in there, because at the end of the day, if the band director is the one helping you write the show and collaborating with you, they're going to be the ones teaching it. Their students are going to be the ones playing it. What they think and feel and experience with the music is really what matters. There's a couple of things that I was writing for a show this summer that they just weren't going to work. We tried a couple of different versions, and at the end of the day, we decided, like, hey, even though it might take a little longer to get the beats to us, let's just go ahead and start over, and let's have these parameters let's have these parameters in mind, and then we'll be fine. And so I did. And what would happen was it was a closer, actually. The first 3 movements of the show were, pretty solid. They were going to be effective in what we needed them to be. But the closer just wasn't working. So I would write a closer, send it along, like, man, that wasn't working. Okay, cool, start over. What I ended up doing is, since I kept all of the other versions, I actually created a separate file that was just movements that didn't work. And I put the school's name of the show that I was working on, so I knew where it came from, so I had some context. So let's say, next year, someone comes up and be like, hey, I was thinking of doing a film noir show. Like, oh, I tried to write that last year and it didn't work. Let me see if this works. So it's not like wasted effort, and it's always good practice and, getting more familiar with your notation software. And if it's in the name of having a more, if it's a more appropriate product for the students that are going to be playing it, all the better. So that to me is it's just my favorite part of this. Is, I like getting stuff right, but I like getting stuff wrong too. I like someone saying, hey, I have an opinion about the work you did. And, sometimes that was really good, or no, that was really bad. And those are, but sometimes it's like, hey, this isn't going to work for this reason. And so that's a really good way to grow as a composer and as an arranger. So that's sort of the philosophical side of it. But once it gets time to, let's say you're finishing up, you've got all of your progress files shared, and there's been collaboration back and forth. It's a little bit of work, actually sending the email. Sometimes it takes 30 minutes to an hour, sometimes, depending on how long your show is or how complicated, for the director to sit there and write out some notes and write suggestions. So you don't want to just arbitrarily mess around, but sort of try to relish that collaborative effort. And once you're done, you're like, okay, cool, this is a show that's created and that we know is more likely to work than something that I just handed you and failed. So let's say that we're all the way to the end of the process. We've collaborated, we've got our progress files, we know what we're going to do, and we're ready to distribute the parts. Again, there's a couple of different ways to do that. Some directors want, the notation file just because, I can extract them and print them, or maybe I'll make some tweaks and I want to be able to have that freedom. And I was like, cool, right on. Send them that, and it's easy, pretty easy to do. Let's say, for example, though, that the director's either not familiar with software, doesn't have the time to get in and extract parts. Extracting parts should take a while. And this is something that I've had to kind of remind myself of, because I wrote a really, really fancy score, all the rehearsal numbers are in the right spot, the dynamics look great, everything is super clear in all the writing, the percussion students know what they're playing and when, it's going to be awesome. And then, if you just kind of export it like that, and you don't go through and look at all the parts, you're going to find titles missing, you're going to find page numbers in the wrong spot, you're going to find instruments that are in the wrong key. So, it's worth the time, and it should take a while. If you're doing your due diligence, it should take a while to go through every single part and imagine that you're the person that's going to have to play that part. Would you want to see 16 different kinds of fonts, or three different instances of your instrument where there should only be one, or missing a page number, or missing a title? As a performer, I know that I wouldn't like that stuff. When I see something that's been poorly engraved or poorly exported, I could probably still read it, and at the end of the day, it may not hinder the process, but it's something that I do, and I try to have a little bit of pride in what I'm doing. I want it to look really nice, and I want the person who's reading it to know and believe and accept that I spent a lot of time, and this was something that was very thoughtful, and that also that I'm a professional at what I do. If I'm going to do this and you're going to pay me any money for it at all, it should look really, really, really good all the time, even if it's just like an updated score. So what I'll do is I'll go through and spend the time, and I'll take sometimes like a full day or 2 days and make sure every part looks really great. And a lot of times I'll do 2 different kinds of files. So the score typically will have to be by itself, just because the piece of the paper is typically a different size, sometimes a different orientation. But I'll do a score in one file. I will do separate files for every part, so that if somebody needs a specific part, they can go find it. And then I will also do a PDF of every part inside one file. So the first time they do it, they can go in and print such and such number of this page, or such and such number of this page. But just having both of those makes everything easier, and it doesn't take me any more time or effort to export them that way. So it's I treat that part of it as just sort of the nice bow around the package at the end. It is kind of a present. I always feel like, here's this thing that we worked on together, and that hopefully looks really nice, and hopefully you feel excited to look at and read. As is almost always the case, there's also some edits that typically have to be done, sometimes right away, sometimes a couple of weeks into the season. And sometimes it's big stuff like, hey, the saxes aren't playing here, and we're going to take what the saxes we're playing and put that in the clarinets. So that kind of requires a score overhaul and a couple of parts to change. But if you just get in the habit of being diligent with those part exporting endeavors, and updating those scores, what I will do is anytime I change something inside the part, I'll put changed on such and such date. And then inside the score, I'll put changed on such and such date. And then I'll put at the very bottom inside the copyright box, this score is current as of such and such date. So that way, if we know that there's been changes made and there's other different parts floating around, or we're not sure which part is which, then we're happy to know that those dates are there at the bottom, kind of waiting for us. So, as far as the process, a lot of times that's it. It's a pretty dense and thorough process, but to me, it's something that at the end of it, you should feel pretty close to the people that you are working with. the people that I've written shows with and for over the last couple of years, I really do kind of feel like those people have become more friends than just clients. It's not like hey, I need something for my a cappella group, I may never speak to you again. When you're working with a marching band, someone in charge of a marching band, you're going to be speaking with them again. And one of my favorite things ever is, if I get a look in my inbox and I see a video of kids playing my beats, there's just nothing better than that. I look at it and I'm like, I don't even care if it's, if the kids executed it well. What means a lot to me is, I was part of their experience. I was part of their life, and it was so important to me. And so that having that experience and sharing that is super, super important. It's why one of the reasons I do, what I do. So that's it. That's my thoughts on a bunch of big parts of marching band design. And there's a lot to be said, and there's a lot more that I could probably say about it. But I'd like to hear your thoughts. So if you are listening to this, if you see the blog post, or if you have some thoughts on the Facebook page, go ahead and post them. It's really, really great to hear from people. I'd love to hear your thoughts on marching band and design and composition and arrangement and communication, collaboration. I'd love to hear what you guys think. And I'm really excited to be kind of doing it in this medium. It's really great to be able to kind of expand on some of these things and kind of get it out there. Because I want to get better too. If you hear something that I'm doing, that you're like, hey, I've tried that, but I also tried this new thing, and it's much better. I would love to get better at what I do and give a better product and be a better professional in that field. So. Again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I look forward to sharing some more thoughts with y'all. All right, be good.